So as many of you know, I have my own publishing imprint called Boundless Press through Bindery Books, which is a new startup that came on the scene a few years back and has completely disrupted the industry. Now, as someone who has been on BookTube for many years now and who has actually worked in the publishing industry before leaving it completely, I have a lot of thoughts about the publishing industry and how it is quite literally not invested in actually publishing good books. So I want to discuss this topic in the context of me publishing the first ever book with my imprint Boundless Press, which is Dust Settles North by JEN-nuh-nee. It's coming out on September 30th. And I want to talk about how this book literally would not be possible without a new publishing model like we are doing with Bindery. In all essence, this book would not have made it through the traditional publishing industry, but this is an incredible book, one that definitely deserves to be out there in the world, and one that I think so many people should be reading. And I think this book and its publishing journey is so indicative of how there are so many incredible stories out there, good stories out there, that the publishing industry is quite literally not invested in publishing. So with that said, grab your cup of tea and sit down for a longer discussion video. Okay, before we move on to the video, I did want to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart, which is my small business. As many of you know, I started my small business called This Story Ain't Over, named after my channel that is full of literary inspired bookish gifts. This includes book sleeves that I sew myself, pop sockets that you can put on your Kindle or Kobo e-reader, charms, stickers, bookmarks, whatever you can think of. And recently with the holidays coming up, I've been trying to level up my marketing game. And I'm so glad to say that the sponsor of today's video, Brevo, has been a game changer for me. Brevo is the go-to marketing automation and CRM platform for businesses looking to enhance their marketing strategy. Brevo helps you create meaningful relationships with your customers through powerful email marketing, automation, SMS, and chat and customer relationship management tools. Brevo makes everything super easy, and you can also see your analytics to make sure that everything's working well. Their email editor is super easy to use. It's just a drag and drop, and it's definitely made making marketing emails so much easier for me. And if you're someone who isn't that tech savvy, this is the perfect tool for you. So if you're a small business like me and you're trying to find a way to simplify your marketing and make it accessible for yourself and easy to use, then I highly recommend checking out Brevo. And you can actually redeem my code STORY to get 50% off the first 3 months of the annual plans of the business and starter plans. Thank you so much to Brevo for sponsoring this video. And now let's get back into the discussion. Okay, I had to put on my glasses because I can't see shit and I need to see my notes. So when it comes to publishing, you would think in principle that an author / writer could write a book that they believe in, that they think is a story that needs to be told, and then simply get it published just by the merit of that work. Of course, that's not actually how publishing works. And publishing, contrary to what you might think, is not a meritocracy. So say you're a writer, say you're JEN-nuh-nee, who wrote this incredible book about two siblings dealing with the grief of their mother's passing and who journey to Egypt for their mother's funeral and are dealing with their grief in very different ways. They're Egyptian American, they're dealing with their cultural and religious identities as well. And it's ultimately a story about coming of age even when you're an adult and living between two cultures. Now envision you're Dina and you have done an MFA, you are an incredible writer, you have written this incredible book, and now you want to get it published. It's not just a matter of submitting yourself to a slush pile and, you know, just hoping that you're the best book out of the ones in the pile. It's actually a matter of marketing yourself and appealing to the very subjective opinions of agents, publishers, editors, and so on. So in this scenario, Dina goes and, you know, tries to get an agent. And that's typically the first step to getting published. You get an agent to represent you. They take a percentage cut, but they give you their expertise and their connections, and they are able to get you in front of publishers. Now, this in and of itself, in some ways makes sense, but it also is kind of sucky because depending on the agents that you have and the connections that they have and the reputation that they have, this could make or break your career. But aside from that, you also need to appeal to the agent themselves. And this involves writing a query letter where you basically elevator pitch your book to an agent. And then you also give them sample pages. And again, this is where publishing gets into a very subjective sort of space. Objectively, you could say that there are some authors that are just better writers than others, but Dina was a traditionally trained author and she had a compelling story. So right from the get-go, you as an author need to be able to market yourself, to market your book, and to essentially convince someone to read it before they even get to reading it. Now, there's also been discussion recently of just how, you know, agents and publishers are also looking for authors with social followings and hoping that they'll be able to basically market their books themselves and sell their books themselves when they get published and when their book is out there in the world. And that is another level of pressure on authors these days, that they need to not only be a great writer and convince people to read their books, and this is a job in and of itself aside from writing the book. Now, say you get an agent, like Dina got an agent who's lovely. They'll go out to the various publishers and editors that they know / they know of in the industry, and they're going to pitch the book to those editors. And this often involves like a submission packet that they give to these editors. And a lot of times this is also built on, you know, the connections of the agent agent and the reputation that they have, like I said, but you're also limited by the fact that these editors are acquiring other books as well. And so they need to slot your book within a season of books that they have acquired or are acquiring, and they typically look to balance out the list. If you've ever worked in publishing at all, you've probably heard the phrase, we already have XYZ diverse identity on the list this season or this year. We don't need another, which is absolutely frustrating and just like another indicator of how hard it is to be a author of color or a BIPOC author in this industry. And I do think it comes down to the fact that these editors, these publishers are trying to, buy books or offer on books that they think will sell. And oftentimes the, opinion of what will sell is fairly subjective. And I'll get to that in a second. So say that Dina has gotten her agent, that her agent has submitted to all these publishers, and that she actually gets a book deal in traditional publishing, which not happen in actuality. Her book was rejected by traditional publishers, and that's how it ended up, in front of me at Bindery for Boundless Press, and reading the book and falling in love with it and wanting to publish it. But let's just say it had gotten a deal from, say, a big 5 publisher or another major publisher in traditional publishing. After the publisher decides that they're going to acquire this book, they'll offer an advance for the author, and typically this can range from really small to really big depending on the author. And there are a lot of books that don't ever actually end up earning out their advance, which is essentially when you sell enough copies that your royalties amount to and equal to the amount of advance money that you got. So it's essentially the publisher paying you in advance, so paying your royalties in advance for them to be able to acquire your book. Now, advances are really tricky because, on the one hand, you want a high advance because it's going to be your salary, your, pay for the next few years. And this is where we get into the crazy territory of advances and how they're very biased and how often, white authors get much higher advances. But it's also not as flashy as it seems because of the way that advances are delivered to authors. Typically, advances are split into multiple payments that are given to authors. They would typically get like a percentage of that money when they sign the deal, and then they'll be given another part of it when they submit the book, and then maybe when they finish revisions, and then when the book is published. So there's different like milestones throughout the journey where they will get paid out part of this advance. But say you have an advance of $50,000 and you sign a deal for your book in, say, 2018, and then your book only comes out in 2020. This is actually very typical. Publishing is very slow, notoriously very slow, where, you'll sign a deal and then, the book might not come out for another year or 2 years. So when you're taking this, say, $50,000 advance and you're stretching that across 2 years and it's given to you in parts, then each year you're not actually making a livable wage or one that, can afford you any kind of luxury. So this is where advances seem kind of trippy, and we'll get into royalties in a second. And then another thing to keep in mind with advances is that, you want a higher advance so that you can earn a livable wage. But also, if you don't end up actually selling that many copies and you never earn out your advance, then that is also a dox on your career as an author. Because when it comes to signing a new deal with another publisher or the same publisher, they will look at your sales history and see if, you actually earned out your advance and if you are a good bet for another deal. So that's the sort of financial aspect of things for an author as they're going through their editorial process and they're going from getting the deal to getting published. Now, another thing that happens during the publishing process before the book comes out is the sales aspect of it. The sales team is the team that goes out to retailers, to different stores, and gets them to stock the books. And getting the sales reps excited is the work of the marketing and editorial teams. And so we're going through multiple stages of convincing people to read this book based off of some amorphous details, that are not actually the content of the book. At this point in the stage, not many people are reading the book to, discover its merits. They're just going based off of some bullet points on a slide that the editorial or marketing team has given to these sales reps. But it is their job to get the sales reps excited, get their, feedback. If Walmart or Target is, favoring covers that have cartoon people on them, then you as a publisher, it's in your interest to, cater to these big retailers who you ideally want to stock your books. But even before that, one thing that comes into play here is sales comps. And sales comps, I feel like, are the insidious little thing in the background of the publishing industry that quite literally makes it the mess that it is. Sales comps is this antiquated system that publishing operates on where each book that a publisher acquires and that they want to sell needs to have sales comps. This is typically 2 to 3 titles that the publisher, it could be either the editorial team, the marketing team, or the sales team. It depends on each sort of publisher and, location. Sometimes, a foreign branch of a publisher will do things differently, etc. But essentially, it's someone's job at some point to sit down and look at this book. So let's take the example of Dust Settles North and say, okay, what are 3 other books that are similar to this one that came out in the last 2 years, because recency is a thing. You want to go based off of recent sales. So you're going to try to get something within the last 2 years if you can, and something that tonally and content-wise matches the book, but has also sold well. And this is where things get messed up, especially if you are an author of color, because sales comps operate on this system of using what came before to inform your bets for right now. And yeah, that makes sense. We're going off of our experience, whatever. But when you really think about it, when it comes to something like publishing with stories that are unique and are different as time goes on, like if you are a book like Dust Settles North, if there's no precedent for a book by an Egyptian American author or an Arab author, or a book with BIPOC main characters who are messy and real and dealing with their emotions, if there's no other book that you can point to within the last 2 years that has sold well, then you are forced to pick some other sales comp or whatever is similar that, may not have sold well. And then you're also dealing with the fact that some publishers want to find sales comps within their same umbrella publisher because they can find the sales a little bit easier and it's more data to compare. If you're going based off of that, your pool gets even more limited. Another limitation is that for a sales comp, you don't want to comp something that's like a wild bestseller because, people just think that that's a unicorn and, you shouldn't be comparing yourself to that unicorn because it just seems like you're grasping at straws. And this was something I remember doing in publishing, looking for sales comps and having this situation where I was getting to the books by BIPOC and diverse authors who are doing something different, who are disrupting the status quo, who are writing different stories, but there is no precedent for them. And so therefore, there's no way to prove that they are going to sell well or that people are going to value those stories. And very often, if someone is not a champion of that book, they're going to just comp it to whatever they can find. And that will often just end up being, this or that BIPOC author's book that, didn't sell well because, the publishers never really put any marketing dollars behind it. So how would it sell well? I've talked about how publishing is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is one of the major situations where it is, because if there's no precedent, then you can't bank on this new thing. And then you just end up in this cycle of these books not selling, because the sales comps basically inform the sales reps and then them going out to retailers that, these are the numbers that we can use to back this book. This is how it might sell. And so your sales comps actually play a huge factor into whether your book is going to sell. Some of you may remember from a few years back when Penguin Random House tried to buy Simon & Schuster, so one of the big 5 publishers buying another big 5 publisher. This had happened before. Penguin had bought Random House. There used to be 6 big publishers. So they had done this before and they tried to buy Simon & Schuster. But that prompted this huge trial and there was a lot of discussion in the industry and ultimately the sale was blocked. However, during that trial, a lot of interesting information came out about the industry and with some interesting stats. So I'm going to read you a bit of a New York Times article. From 2012 to 2019, print book sales grew by more than 20% from 9 billion to 11 billion. And book sales were strong during the pandemic, rising by another 20% from 2019 to 2021. So this is something that one of the people testifying said. Now, this article points out a very important fact, which is that a minuscule percentage of books that are published, within a year generate the vast majority of profits. During their testimony, Penguin Random House executives said that just 35% of books the company publishes are profitable. What does that mean? That they are making a profit, that the money that they have spent on this book, whether it's from the author advance to the editorial salary, to the marketing, to the printing, everything, if they have earned out all that money and made more on top of that, then they have made that book profitable. And this executive is basically saying that only 35% of books are actually profitable, that are even breaking even. But not only that, the article goes on to say, among the titles that make money, a very small sliver, just 4%, account for 60% of those profits. Now, the Penguin Random House executive goes on to say, that's how risky our business is. It's the books that you don't pay a lot for and become runaway bestsellers. So essentially what he is saying, and this is something I have mentioned in other videos before, it's this idea that publishing just tries to throw things at the wall, tactics at the wall, hoping that some something will move the needle on some of these books, and then just cross their fingers and hope for the best that something will become a bestseller. In many cases, though, if they have paid a big advance, then they're going to try to follow that up with a lot of investment in marketing to make sure that, that advance pays off. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling thing where they put the money behind the things that they already kind of put the money behind. But it does create this situation where very often, sometimes books will just take off on their own merit because they're just amazing, because influencers or, actual public or word of mouth has locked onto a book and has made that book a bestseller. But oftentimes they haven't really done anything themselves to make those books bestsellers. They've just kind of let it go out into the world and hoped for the best. The trial offered examples of books that publishers paid a relatively small amount for that turned out to be a great hit. Sally Kim, the publisher of Penguin Random House imprint Putnam, said they acquired Where the Crawdads Sing for mid-six figures. The book has gone on to sell around 15 million copies worldwide. The article continues to say that the issue is industry-wide and has been exacerbated by the rise of online retail, which tends to reinforce the visibility of bestsellers. In 2021, fewer than 1% of 3.2 million titles that BookScan tracked sold more than 5,000 copies. That is insane. So when we think about it this way, we are facing an industry that is publishing more books, but somehow most are not profitable or aren't selling more than 5,000 copies, and where a very tiny percentage of them become bestsellers and are continuously bestsellers because they are reinforced by further marketing and investment and retailers putting these bestsellers in front of your face, whether that's online or in store, simply because those are surefire bets. And so of course this reinforces a situation where we are dealing with, a lot of not great books getting published and continuously being platformed. But all this is still built on a system that publishing has created itself. This idea of selling based off precedence, of not giving the industry and people within the industry a proper wage or big enough teams or enough time to properly consider books and really dig into the weeds of why this might be valuable, versus just banking on a few different tropes that the book has and giving it some buzzy comps that will essentially get it sold. And this is where I think the story of Dust Settles North really kind of diverges, because Dust Settles North would not have been published into the world if it had not been for the fact that it came across my submissions desk. When I started my imprint with Bindery, this was one of the manuscripts that I read within the first, I would say, 6 months. And this was quite literally the book that blew me away. And I remember reading this book and thinking, oh my God, this is so good. How has this not been scooped up by another publisher yet? And I think the fact of the matter is that, there's not really a precedent for it. There's not many books like it. There's not many literary fictions that still feel coming of age but are adult, that deal with this feeling of living between multiple cultures and religious guilt. And even if it has been done, it's been done for a different identity. And publishing doesn't care to get the nuanced takes from many different people. It simply just likes to find one unicorn amongst a race of people and prop them up as their darling. Even as I've been trying to talk about Dust Settles North, I've been trying not to pigeonhole it into, a few buzzwords, because it is ultimately a very lyrical and beautiful literary fiction that you need to experience to really get. And I feel like that's something that publishing as an industry has no longer been able to give its readers the grace of exploring. In the ye old days, and this might be a romanticization, but you could go into a bookstore and sort of browse the books within the store and just stumble upon something unexpectedly. Whereas these days we are, focused on the popular books, the bestsellers, and this is reinforced by our online world and social media sort of amplifying the same few things and same few people and putting them in front of our faces and subliminally convincing us that we need to be reading those books and not the hidden gems. And that's where I think Bindery as a model is just so interesting and exciting and such a disruptor of the industry, because Bindery is built on this idea of being Patreon plus publishing, having these membership communities for these book influencers like myself who trust in that person's taste and would gladly go read the book that influencer is, telling them that they really loved and enjoyed. And it's a sort of like amplified version of word of mouth marketing, but it's also this opportunity for us as influencers, as tastemakers on Bindery, as people with the imprints and choosing the books, to basically champion a book and get compensated for that free labor, because, usually we do not get compensated in any way for all of the books that we promote and, convince you guys to buy and read, but also take the burden of marketing and sales off the shoulders of the author and remove this requirement for them to become basically influencers on social media so that they can sell their books, and instead just focus on the actual art of being being a writer and writing the books. I think out of all of this, that's been one of my most favorite things about this entire process. Not only getting to be part of the process from choosing the book to, seeing it go through editorial. I don't edit the books. There are actual editors that we use from the production company that we work with called Girl Friday Productions, who are amazing. There are project managers and editors and just incredible people from Girl Friday who work on these books and make them better, and I appreciate them so much. So, I'm getting to see the process of these books going through these stages in the publishing process, but also I get to influence, the marketing and come up with unique ideas that suit the book because I've read the book, because I am invested in the book, and I'm not just thinking of it in terms of like, oh, it ticks off, this spot on the list and, we'll do XYZ things and then just hope it sells, and if it doesn't, who cares? Like, I am invested in this book and in this author and in the careers of these authors. And Bindery itself is also very invested in its authors because most authors don't actually earn a livable wage from the books that they publish. But with Bindery's model, they actually get a much larger percentage of their royalties. So typical royalties for publishing range between 10 to 15% of each copy sold, which if you do the math is not very much. But Bindery offers a much higher percentage, which is 50% of the royalties go to the author, and then the remaining percentage go towards the tastemaker and Bindery itself as a publisher. Ultimately, the goal of Bindery is to ensure that these authors can have longer careers where their value is actually based off of the books that they write versus some other random, factor. And I don't want to make it all rosy and seem like, oh, I just choose authors based off of like the book that they write. There's other factors that go into it. Do I think this person is a good person? I'm not going to publish someone who's like a racist just because they write well, but I am able to publish books that typically would not have gotten published. Like even the next book that we're publishing with Boundless Press, Burn the Sea, is a historical fantasy, which in this market and day and age would probably get shoehorned into romantasy because it has romance in it, but it's not actually the focus of the book at all. It's much more focused on the main character, this queen, and her history, and just her being a badass, and also the female characters in the book and the friendships there. And it's so gratifying to know that I can carve a space for this book to get it out into the world and get it to the people who will actually enjoy it. And I think that's another major thing about this publishing model under Bindery. It's the fact that we are not trying to just sell bestsellers and make bestsellers. We are trying to sell to the people who will genuinely love these books. Each tastemaker has their own micro imprint. We are not publishing 20 books a year. I'm sure maybe one of them will get to that point at some point, but currently most of us are publishing 1 to 2 books a year, and we are giving concentrated attention to those books, to those authors, to the process, to marketing and selling these books so that they can have an actual shot in the world to actually make it into the percentage of books that sell more than 5,000 copies and, break even, that are profitable, and to try to make a long-term career for our authors. Even when I think about Boundless Press and the books that I'm publishing, I don't think each of these books is, for everyone out there in the world. And it's not really my mission to make each one a bestseller, though it would be great if they were. The idea is to reach people who I think are going to really love those books. And I love that each of the tastemakers' imprints have their own uniqueness to them. They're each acquiring things that the tastemaker loves and enjoys and knows that their audience will enjoy. And that sometimes means that some of the imprints, only publish fantasy or, cozy fantasy. Some of them publish, literary fiction or queer stories or, BIPOC stories only. And I think that's amazing because we are carving out intentional space for these stories that typically would just get ignored because they don't fit in with the status quo. So yeah, that's what I think is the important part about this entire situation. And I am just holding on to that as we approach the pub date for Dust Settles North on September 30th. If you haven't already, go do me a favor and add it to your Goodreads, pre-order the book, or request it from your local library or your local indie. If you're in New York, consider coming to the launch event on September 30th, which I will be at, and you can go RSVP for free at the Eventbrite down below. You have to RSVP to come. And yeah, I just hope that you can support my imprint Boundless Press and Dust Settles North and, just make it possible for me to continue publishing books with my imprint and through Bindery and just continue disrupting the industry because we definitely need it. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you to my Bindery members for supporting me and my channel and making all of this possible. And I will see you all in my next video. So please remember that the story ain't over. Bye.